Hi everybody. So as many of you know, back in April and again in June, President Trump signed executive orders that suspend certain immigration to the United States. Well, back when both of those executive orders were signed, there were certain exceptions to the executive orders. We've recently received updates on the types of exceptions and the extent of those exceptions in the United States. This is big news, and I'm going to share with you the important details that you need to know about. So make sure to stick around. Hi everyone. So back in April, President Trump signed an executive order suspending the issuance of certain immigrant visas. Later on in June, President Trump signed another executive order that temporarily suspends the issuance of certain non-immigrant visas, like the J1 visa, the L1 visa, and the H1B visa. Well, when both of these executive orders were signed, there were exceptions mentioned. For example, there was an exception for people that were going to come to the United States to work in the national interest. Well, there weren't many details that were provided on the types of people that could apply for visas still, or the extent to which people could apply for visas. Well, recently, the Department of State has provided us with additional clarification on the types of people that can apply for these exceptions. In this video, I'm going to share with you the details of those exceptions. As a quick intro, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Ashoori and I'm a U.S. immigration lawyer based in Los Angeles. At my law firm, we represent clients from all over the world. We focus exclusively on immigration law, and we regularly post videos to make sure that you're up to date with what's happening in immigration. So if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now. Now, in a moment, I'm going to share my screen with you so that we can go over these exceptions one by one. But before I do that, there's a couple of quick important points that I have to mention. One is that there are a lot of exceptions and they can get very detailed. So I'm going to review some of the most important ones that I think you should know about. But in addition, I'm also going to link below to the actual text of the Department of State so you can read the exceptions for yourself in detail. Now, the next important point that I want to mention is that if you think that you qualify for one of these exceptions, there's a two-step process that you have to do. One is that you have to request an emergency appointment with your local consulate or embassy. Right now, most consulates and embassies are closed for routine visa appointments due to the coronavirus pandemic. So in order for you to go in for a visa interview, you have to request an emergency appointment. In addition, if you feel that you qualify for one of these exceptions, you're going to have to provide documentation and evidence that you satisfy one of the exceptions. Now, the last point that I want to mention before we get started is that right now there's a lawsuit that was filed against the Trump administration to stop enforcement of these executive orders. Now, there's a very important hearing that's scheduled to take place on August 27th. And without getting into too much detail about the legal specifics, depending on how this hearing turns out, the court could temporarily stop enforcement of these executive orders, which would allow thousands of people to immigrate to the United States who were otherwise prevented from doing so due to these executive orders. So now let's get started and talk about these new exceptions. Okay, everyone, so let's get started and review some of these exceptions. Let's start with some of the H1B exceptions. So one, there's an exception for healthcare professionals, researchers, and other public health professionals that are entering the U.S. to help fight COVID-19. Now, I'm paraphrasing some of these exceptions. So again, to find the exact wording of these exceptions, go ahead and check the link that I'm posting in the description below. Now let's move on. There's also an exception if there was a request by a U.S. government agency or if it's to meet a U.S. foreign policy objective. There's an exception for one of those cases, or I should say for either of those cases. Now, the third exception is for people that are resuming ongoing employment. And this is a big one, so pay attention. If you will be resuming ongoing employment in the U.S. in the same position with the same employer in the same visa classification, then you have an exception to this immigration suspension. Now, this is really big. And basically the reason why this exception exists is because they don't want this executive order to punish U.S. employers that would now have to scramble to try to find somebody to fill the position. So again, if you're resuming your ongoing employment, which means that you'll be resuming ongoing employment in the U.S. in the same position with the same employer in the same visa classification, then there's an exception for the H1B visa. Now let's continue. So another exception is if travel to the U.S. is necessary to facilitate the continued economic recovery of the U.S. And there's various factors that you have to show to prove this. And again, you can see that in the link that I'm going to post below. So let's move on. Let's start talking about some of the H2B exceptions. So similar to the H1B, there's an exception if there was a request by a U.S. government agency or if it's to meet a U.S. foreign policy objective. There's also an exception if travel to the U.S. is necessary to facilitate the continued economic recovery of the U.S. So again, those two exceptions are also available for the H1B visa. Now let's continue to move forward. Let's talk about some of the L1 exceptions. So again, this one is also available for H1B, and it's basically for healthcare professionals, researchers, and other public health professionals entering the U.S. to help fight COVID-19. There's an exception that would allow that person to apply for an L1 visa. There's also an exception if there was a request by a U.S. government agency or to meet a U.S. foreign policy objective. Again, this exception is also available for H1B and H2B, so it's a popular one. And again, there's this exception for the L1 visa, where if you're resuming ongoing employment. And just to repeat what that means, it's if you will be resuming ongoing employment in the U.S. in the same position with the same employer in the same visa classification, then you're eligible for an exception to apply for an L1 visa. Now, this is going to apply to a lot of people that want to apply for their L1 visas. So it's a very big exception. And again, the idea behind it is that the Trump administration does not want to punish U.S. employers and put them in a position now where they have to scramble to find another worker to fill the position. Now let's talk about some other L1 exceptions. So now we have an exception that's just available for the L1A visa. And basically this is travel by a senior level executive or manager filling a critical business need of an employer meeting a critical infrastructure need. So basically for this one, there's a lot of factors, and the person has to meet some of these factors in order to show that they qualify for this exception. And you can see the specific details in the link that I've posted in the description below. Now let's also talk about this L1B exception. So this exception is only available for the L1B, and it's for people where travel as a technical expert or specialist meeting a critical infrastructure need. Again, so that's another exception that's just available for the L1B visa. Now, I want to mention again that this is not a complete list of all the exceptions. I've linked below to the appropriate website where you can look at all the exceptions of the national interest exceptions. So go ahead and feel free to click that. And over there, you'll also see some exceptions to the J1 visa as well. The J1 visa has a ton of exceptions too, so you can check it out using that link. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into this video. I hope you liked it. If you know anybody that could benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to empower you with knowledge. So the more people that can see this video, that can benefit from this video, the better. If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. When you hit that thumbs up button, it really helps us out because it helps YouTube know to share this video with a wider audience. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And again, if you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you stay in the loop with all of the new videos that we're posting. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this video, and I'll see you on the next one.